There he goes again, making enemies and influencing no one.
Welcome to the 3% Podcast. This is Chad Post from Open Letter Books. I'm here with Tom Roberts from Albertine and New Directions, and we're going to talk about a few things today. We just babbled on a little bit about the Rome Book Fair and about this presentation I have to give on the lack of translations from Italian into English. And I like your idea that there's not a lot of intellectual discourse in Italian writing about, or intellectual thinkers that have been translated from Italian talking about books or about things like that, like there has been from France and Germany, and that makes a huge difference in the reception of those books.
Right. If you're, you're a publisher, you're an editor at, I don't know, let's pick on Random House, and somebody comes to you with a brand new, highly literary Italian novel. What are they referencing? What books are they talking about that it might be like that are also Italian? What sort of cultural issues is it arising from? That sort of thing. And I'm sure this stuff exists in Italy, obviously, but it's just so little known in the U.S. that I think an American editor, even a very smart one, is just looking at all this and just doesn't know what they're looking at. And I can understand why they might be fearful to wade into those waters and just have no idea if American readers, even, very smart literary readers, are just going to take the time to familiarize themselves with with a new culture and a new way of discussing these things.
Yeah, I think the only one that just came to mind is Roberto Colasso. He would sort of fall into that, wouldn't he?
How widely is he translated?
Almost all of his books are translated into English, because most of them are essays or about literature, about Kafka, so on and so forth. Right. But he's also a publisher, no? Yeah, Italian writer and publisher. So he's got sort of like a
inside track.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But aside from him, I can't think of many others. What if I just say, name 5 Italian authors? Who are the first 5 people who come to mind?
Well, Elena Ferrante.
Okay.
Dante.
Wow.
Machiavelli. Do you know what I mean? That's what you start. You immediately start going back hundreds of years, which is really unfortunate. Calvino?
What's that?
Calvino?
Calvino is the one I thought of first.
Oh, I thought of,
Ferrante and Calvino. And Moravia and, what's her name? Morante.
Yeah, it's not...
But those both, Morante and Moravia, are mid-century and gone. Passed away, gone.
Tabucchi? Wasn't he Italian?
Yeah, he's still alive, I think.
No, I think he died last year.
Oh, did he? Oh, shit. Yeah. There's a lot of people died this last weekend. Not to be bleak about it, but it felt like every author was dying. Kent Haroof, Mark Strand, and who's the third one? I forget. Alan Kornblum passed away last week too, who's a Coffee House Press publisher. But yeah, you're right. There isn't the contemporary Italian books don't exist. One of the things don't get translated unless they are mafia books.
Right, which is unfortunate because we, as a country, as Americans, need to get over our fucking fascination with criminals.
Crime and dystopias.
We romanticize the mafia to such an obscene level. It's really disheartening.
Tabucchi did die in March of 2012.
There you go.
Yep. So there, one of the things I'm recommending to them during this presentation is that they start putting together one of those 10 books from Italy to at least start getting information out to publishers and at least being able to highlight some of these writers that we can't even name.
Right. That's what I was saying. This idea that you're going to get one book across your desk, one manuscript, and it's sort of existing in a vacuum. I feel like Italian publishers or whoever's trying to get the Italian books translated should be presenting, like you're suggesting, more of an array of literature, so you can sort of get a feel for what's going on, and not just, okay, here's this one book, but here's how it compares to other books. Here's some context for it.
Yep.
Here's, something that it might be a reaction to. Here's, here's the details of a political scandal that, gave rise to it, or something to sort of frame everything, as opposed to it just being published this very good book,
Yeah. And France does have that.
France has that, and they have a long history of it, so they're it's a well-oiled machine at this point. So,
which is kind of a good segue into the thing that we wanted to talk about first, which is this article that John O'Brien from Dalkey Archive wrote for BookBrunch, your daily serving of news and views, called "Don't Blame the Readers for Lack of Interest in Translations. The Fault is Institutional."
BookBrunch, I believe, is the British version of Publisher's Lunch.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, and I think were on the road somewhere.
That was at Alta.
And I learned about this because, for those who don't know, the bookstore I work at is literally housed in the Cultural Services Embassy from France. And so the French book office, they're upstairs.
Cultural Services.
The book department is upstairs. And the director of the department, there are like 6 women. It is all women. She came down to the bookstore and she's like, "Oh, did you see this John O'Brien thing?" And blah, blah, blah. And she was ranting and raving about it. And, she left and I looked it up and started reading it. And I could see why she was upset. John O'Brien takes several shots at the French because they don't give him money, it seems. Anyway, can you, for those listening who do not know, have a history with John O'Brien. So maybe you can shed some light on what he's talking about here, where he says that he's basically talking about how he would like official sort of organizations from foreign countries to fund and facilitate, even if it's not funding, translations into English from these respective countries' writers. Yes?
Yep. So, there's he goes through and criticizes our translation database at the beginning, or essentially the way of contextualizing it by saying, in America, that we've increased the number of books that have been translated. Oh, but this is self-promotional nonsense because we can use a percentage to say that translations have grown an enormous 25%. All that seems a little bit personal, but putting that aside, he goes on to talk about the Korean Library of Korean Literature, whatever they're calling it, their Korean literature series, right? And it says, why did Dalkey Archive undertake the publication of 25 Korean titles in a 4-year period? 2 reasons. First, because the books should be translated and published. And second, because the Literature Translation Institute of Korea is both realistic and visionary in providing the necessary funds to publish these books. And by necessary support, I do not mean the 60% of the translation costs alone that France provides and takes such pride in, nor the even lower support of Germany and Austria, nor any number of other countries such as Flemish-speaking Belgium or the Netherlands or Sweden. I could go on and on.
Yeah. So look, I'm just going to put out the cynical thing that I'm sure everyone who read this, who knows anything about John or publishing in any way, might assume, which is that he basically wants his publishing completely underwritten.
Right.
And to me, this sounds a little bit like a scenario in which he doesn't truly believe that these books should be published in English and that they're great books. He just, since they're funding it, they're books to be published and it won't cost them anything and, that sort of thing. Call me cynical, but, I get... This is also what's his name? Peter Mayer doing this very similar sort of thing with the Russians.
Yeah.
100 books over 10 years or something.
Mm-hmm.
Largely because the Russians agreed to pay for the entire damn thing.
Yep. Yeah, there's there's a perspective. So what you're getting at is the bad side of nonprofit publishing. So nonprofit publishing exists or became a field essentially the same way that nonprofit opera or theater, where you're doing something that's valuable for culture, but the marketplace probably can't afford to sustain it fully, or not as fully as it should. and that there are a certain number of books, certain number of things that are important that should be available, but that the marketplace won't necessarily afford. So like a translation from Korean, you might sell 500 copies or sell like 5,000 over 50 years, but if you don't sell enough in the first few years, you're going to lose $10,000, right?
Right.
But nonprofit publishing, like the way that John's describing it in here, the thing that I find objectionable is that he puts all of the burden on the government to give him the maximum amount of money necessary to avoid all risk, rather than a true nonprofit like a Coffee House or Grey Wolf or any of these other places. They get support from a variety of sources, including individuals. And I know Delkey does raise money from individuals, but the emphasis in these articles is always on this government should step in and make their books available by giving us an astronomical sum of money, which I don't think is what a nonprofit should be doing. A nonprofit should be engaging with a large number of community and readers. So like not only selling the books to readers and so on and so forth, but that the readers and the people that find this valuable are supporting them, not just one entity that's like governmental. And the money thing gets weirder. Let me read one other paragraph. This is right after the paragraph that I just read. I should say, too, that enormous sums of money are not a solution. Some countries, Korea, Estonia, Finland, Georgia, Slovenia, for example, make things easier in rather small ways, sponsor trips to their country in which they quite actively arrange for meetings and provide a great deal of information, and bring flexibility to the process, and they are open to new ways of doing things. Others are top-heavy with bureaucratic nooses. What almost all ignore are the publishers. The countries organized or help to organize meetings and conferences concerned with translation issues, but publishers are usually not invited or are far outnumbered by translators, translation associations, and the ubiquitous pen and its growing demands on behalf of translators. Government agencies rarely provide more than about 10% of the total cost of publication, and they yet then want to dictate how books should be done and even how much translators should be paid, even though the countries provide only a portion of those costs. Asking publishers would seem the most obvious single thing that countries could do if they seriously want the number of translations in English to increase.
Look, I don't know all the gritty details and all of these numbers or whatever, but those last few sentences in that paragraph just seem like straight up lies.
I would agree with you on that. Like, okay, so the government provides 10% of the total cost, and like that,
and then dictates. I mean, look, New Directions for one is not a nonprofit, so there is that. Two, we did get the occasional what's called a subvention, which is essentially what all of this is, for various projects here and there. In no way, shape, or form did any of them try to tell us, quote unquote, how the book should be done.
Yeah,
that never happened.
We never have that either. The thing about the paying the translators is that there is, with certain grants, we have to give them the contract with the translator saying we're paying the translator whatever $7,000. Here's the contract for it, and then they say we can give you $4,000 of that. Here's your $4,000. Right. And if you were to be like, well, we're only going to pay the translator $4,000 because you didn't give us the full amount that we were going to pay them, then I feel like it is within the rights of that government to be like, well, screw you then. Like, we're going to give you less. Like, you should also pay them a part of the cost. It shouldn't be solely that the only people who can have their books translated and published in English are the countries that are willing to pay every dime of the whole thing, the whole cost.
There's a very important point to be made about that that I want to come back to. But first, I would like to come back just a little bit and talk about, this idea that it's a partnership between everyone involved. That basically meaning the U.S. nonprofit publisher, and here as well a British publisher, and the other countries should be sharing risk, even if if something is not going to be profitable in the capitalist market, that's fine, but it does not mean that the foreign country should then be the only people funding it, and that you are merely a facilitator. It should be a joint, delivery, a joint risk. And I understand that, what small nonprofit publishers generally offer in lieu of, straight up funding can be, years of experience editing, marketing, publicity, a sales force, a distribution arm, all of these sorts of things, connections with reviewers, and all of these things that matter when you publish a book, and which are sort of, hard to quantify in terms of money, simply because they are based on years of existing and experience. But you should be offering some financial stake as well, to me, simply to sort of indicate that you're willing to take on this risk and that you believe what you're doing is important and that you're willing to put, quite literally, your money where your mouth is. And to me, what the tone of this piece that he's written is, I'm here, I have experience, now you take the risk and we'll deliver it to the marketplace, and that'll be that. Right. And what the other thing is, this makes it sound like he just thinks that they need to be in English, and that's fine. I agree with that. But it doesn't anywhere sort of suggest that he's going to do anything once they're in English. And, you could speak more to this than I could. But his marketing and publicity outreach are just pitiful.
Yeah, they still get more coverage than we do, but they're probably as bad as we are at it, which is mostly my fault because we don't have enough staff time, and I haven't devoted enough staff time to keeping up with doing our publicity. But I think that what you're saying is true. Like, they have Columbia doing their publicity now. Columbia University Press does their distribution and publicity, which consists of mailing books.
Right.
It's not like working the scene and whatever. There is, like, on that level, like the joint risk thing, I think is important because it does give people the sense that you do believe in it, and it causes you as a place to continue doing it, or to like invest yourself and your time, and not just be like, well, since this entire cost is covered, we don't have to do anything.
Right.
And that's kind of exactly what you're saying, and I think that is the tone that comes across here of like, well, if you want your books in English, all you need to do is pay Delkey Archive, and we will put them into English, and therefore your problem is solved. Why are you bothering with like Penn and Translators or any of that kind of stuff? Just give us money, we'll put the books into English.
Right.
And it's problematic for me.
It's very problematic. And this is the point I was going to make before. Once you allow the state governments or, national governments of these places to get involved, you're immediately losing out on what could be a lot of very interesting, perhaps controversial literature. And that's even in, a relatively open-minded sort of government like Korea.
Right.
What if you're talking about a country like, I don't know, Hungary?
Yeah.
If we had to sit around and wait for the Hungarian government to help us with Laszlo Krasznahorkai, he'd never get translated.
No.
Never.
And there's a lot of countries that can't participate in this way. Korea gave them, I think, $250,000. No, it was more than that. It was $500,000 to do these books.
Right.
That's a significant amount of money.
Yeah, and a lot of countries, a lot of, Africa and
I was going to say Nicaragua,
Latin America and Asia, they just simply do not have this stuff in their budget. And whether that's, a matter of just historical sort of organization of the government, or the fact that their governments are in such turmoil so frequently, and, the turnover and, is problematic in terms of finding funds for these sorts of things. Whatever the reason, it just makes it really hard for these places to find money, and for the literary people in these countries to go to the governments and find money. Just, it's next to impossible. So, you're really, one, you're ignoring a large part of the world, and two, even within this, the functioning literary part of the world, you're losing out on what could be the most provocative fiction. Absolutely. Because they are not friends with the government.
Right. And it's so this whole article is set up in a way to like bash the French. There's another. Let me bash the French one more time for your point here. So he goes on to say, at no point in this diatribe have I criticized the readers. With all the self-interest involved in this rather small world of translation and literature, readers are the innocent bystanders. Yet they're the ones that institutions blame for an apparent lack of interest in literature from non-English countries. Readers are at the mercy of the media that makes known, or doesn't, which books are published, and equally at the mercy of funding agencies. Have I mentioned the French? To support their own literature into the current lingua franca. And to the somewhat less responsible bookstores that do not stock translations, adequate numbers, so on and so forth. But one more little shot at the French. The whole thing, it's always bugged me, the chasing money to do books. Like, if you don't want to do French and German books, because
Don't
you
do
feel
it.
like there's enough of them and the most interesting ones are being published. Fine, but like to imply that you're not doing them because they're not paying you enough is really weird when they're so well translated. By contrast to like Korea, Estonia, Finland, Georgia, Slovenia, these all happen to be countries that he names that have funded Delkey heavily to do books from their countries. We have a grant. I'll tell you about our grant, and our difference between this is that we have a grant from the Danish Arts Council for 5 years for approximately $10,000 per book. They're going to do 5 books that are all Danish female writers. And as part of it, since there aren't a lot of Danish female writers that don't write crime that are translated and published here, making those books available is pretty important. But also with each one, we're planning on doing some sort of promotional tour for that author. So like the first one is Naya Marie Ait, that Two Lines did a collection of her stories not too long ago. We have her novel coming out next September and are planning to tour her a little bit. And there's like Josephine Klugart and Eben Mondrup, and we're still looking for the last 2. But the idea is that these books probably won't make us money, and we will definitely spend more than the $10,000 that is being allocated to them. But that at least allows it to like just to justify and to make a promotion out of it too. To be able to say like we are doing these 5 books, so now you have an introduction to female writing from Denmark instead of we're just doing these books randomly.
Right, and it's a sort of good faith sort of agreement to make the most of these 5 books and to give it a sort of program that actually makes sense and is mutually invested in and in the end hopefully mutually beneficial, and especially for the authors. That's the sort of thing that should happen. That's what nonprofits are there for, is to be able to facilitate those sort of things. I mean, New Directions could never do something like that because we just don't like,
Right.
being beholden in that sort of way. It's just a different business model, but that is what nonprofits are for, and that's what they should do. And,
And if we need more money, we can raise it, because we should have enough people by this point in our existence to be able to contact them and do annual fundraising to help supplement anything else. Plus, our sales should be increasing and improving instead of just being like lackadaisical and just wanting funding from governments.
Right.
I think it's funny too that he bashes PEN and translation organizations, translation associations, which inevitably is ALTA, which is something that.
Wait, I mean, I don't know how many translators read this, but why would he take a dig at translators? I mean, that's like his lifeblood. He needs them. And I know that there's probably more translators than, translation jobs by a degree of 10, but he should really want the best translators. And instead he's probably alienating and insulting them in the process of this, diatribe that makes no sense.
I agree. Also, I don't like the implications throughout, and this is a long-standing issue of that the translators are there just to serve the press and they don't deserve anything. Like it constantly comes up as like, well, now they have these countries organizing meetings in which the publishers are outnumbered by translators. So the translators shouldn't be attending these soirees in Korea where they learn about Korean literature and whatever. And then also like PEN's trying to get them more money. Like this is not bad. These are good things for
very,
people.
Very good things. Yeah.
Like it's always like it's one of the current things in a lot of the pieces that he's been writing lately that sort of fits this like, well, you should just be grateful that we're letting you translate a book for us instead of like, well, why these people deserve also like money and some degree of fame or attention or whatever the benefits are. Like the going to Korea, I get to go next week, and this will come up inevitably. And I'm going as one of these trips where Korea, the Literature and Translation Institute, put together a program for me and Will Evans and Ross Ufberg from New Vessel to meet with a series of editors and whomever else, and to talk about different ways that we could do Korean literature. For a translator to go on that is perfect. Like, translators should also be able to participate in that. I don't see why only I should benefit.
Right. I mean, the more knowledgeable translators are about the process and about the books from the beginning of the process, not just, oh, hey, we're translating this book, translate it. you do the actual translation. Like, if they can get involved early on and understand the book's reception in its own country, if they can understand the way the for example, Korean publisher published it, and all of these sort of things sort of matter for the whole process of republishing it, doing it as a translation. And yeah, you should get the translator involved as early as possible for those reasons, so that they feel, one, that they're part of the team and they're easy to work with, and that the best possible translation comes out of this, that they don't feel like, a hired hand, like a dock worker or something like that. They should feel that they're part of the process, and it's because they are, and you should treat them as such. And and if only for the sake of just being a decent human being. And I don't know that John is always interested in this sort of thing.
Yeah, there is like there's just to put a pin in that, sort of, is like there's not just like printing books and selling them. There's more to like the culture of this that is being sort of like shoveled aside to talk about getting more money for the press to do more books, rather than like creating a culture in which all of these things are respected. Because in the end, like, none of us are selling, like, I don't know how to put this exactly, but no one's selling like off of just translations enough money to buy themselves a mansion for the most part. Delkey sure isn't. Like, their sales aren't so spectacular that like whatever, it's just about money. It can't just be about money. If it is, that's depressing. They're selling like 400 copies of a book, and like, I don't know. There should be something more.
Yeah,
it should be more meaningful. But anyway,
and to truly put an end to this, so I linked to this on Twitter because I didn't really want to go into it, and it's impossible on Twitter when you have 140 characters. But I put it up, and Michael Reynolds, of course, from Europa Editions, so he said, "Finally got around to reading this. There he goes again, making enemies and influencing no one."
Oh, man.
So there you go. That's probably how the world received this op-ed, for lack of a better term.
Oh, I was at Alto when this came out, and so I showed a couple of people, and no one was surprised, but everyone was pretty much had that same opinion.
Yeah. So talk to me about Alta. It was
Alta was pretty good. It worked out really well. The Alta, the American Literary Translators Association, has a conference every fall, which has for 37 years been pretty much like the main event and main function of the organization. But a year ago, they moved from where they'd been based at the University of Texas at Dallas and run by Rainer Schulte, sort of ran all of Alta, took care of everything, which had its good and its bad sides. It was very good because the organization was protected and had funding. Bad in the sense that like he was the only person with information about that. So like people weren't as actively engaged as they could have been because he was keeping it all going sort of under the surface. Anyways, he retired, so the organization had to leave, and they've gone through like a series of changes and are even more on the horizon on how they structure themselves, what they plan on doing, how they want things to function. And as part of this is all a prelude to making that will make sense maybe in a minute. But as part of this, they've set up a series of committees because they never had real committees before. And so as part of their program committee, they have people working on just the conference. Instead of the way that it's been worked in the past is that one person would take over. Like I took it over to do the Rochester one, and then I could get a couple people here to help me out, and we had to put together the whole conference, and then you'd be done with it and you'd never deal with them again. So now we have a committee that people are going to be on for multiple years. They have plans on where it's going to be. It goes to Tucson, San Francisco, New York, and Austin over the next 4 years. They have people on each one of those areas that are going to be doing the conference and are on the committee now so they can understand how it can be constructed and how to make it better from year to year instead of just like reinventing the wheel. And I'm actually the chair of that committee, so I'm going to help organize their programming for the conference for the foreseeable future. As part of that, I went to a lot more events this year than I did in the past. Although, man, it's a long days. The panel started at like 9, and there would be things like events afterwards, readings from the Alta Fellows, things like that, receptions that would go until like 9 p.m. So I did skip a lot of afternoon sessions because it was just exhausting. But it was interesting because it did seem more thought out in terms of like constructing a topic, having people reflect on that, and now we're taking that to the next year and saying, how can we do it different this time? So it builds on that instead of just redoing the same panels over and over and over and over again. So there's one on reviewing translations, which is always a panel, and it was fine. It was interesting. The same things that always came up, like about whether or not you should read the original when you review the translation, if you have to mention the translator, so on and so forth. But for the next year, what we're talking about doing is using actual reviews and looking at how they work or don't work, or what's useful about them, or how to talk about it in an actual setting, in an actual review, instead of this theoretical, I try and talk about the translator when I can, blah, blah, blah. And so there was a lot of good stuff. There's Bill Johnson's panel on the style. They always do one called translating prose, or translating style, I think it is. Part 5 was this year's one because they've done it for 5 years. And those are always fascinating because he actually used, Bill Johnson's a genius, and he translates from Polish. And he used part of that book from the Treaty on Shelling Beans that Archipelago published by this Polish author, Myślewski. And he talked about how there's a set phrase. The whole book is set up as a conversation with a mysterious stranger. You only hear one side of the conversation, but you know someone's there. It's unclear who this other person might be. It might be death. It might be imaginary. It might be whatever. But in Polish, they use this one phrase, no, I think it was, that they use as our, or as, or so, or whatever. And he went through specific examples of how he changed that phrase to different things in English to be able to create the sense of speaking to someone and of repeating things that they'd say or giving pauses and that kind of throat clearing gesture in prose. And it was absolutely fascinating. So there was actually really good stuff that was in the content, and then all of the presentations and everything went really smoothly. So I think they've turned the corner a bit and are being able to now rebuild with Erica Mena is the managing director, and she's doing a great job of keeping everyone organized. And Russell Valentino is the president at the moment. And he's very good at seeing a larger picture to move the organization beyond just being a conference or just being a couple days to improve it. And even that editorial speed dating thing was fun.
Really?
Yeah. So there is. Yeah, I know that when they first announced it, was editorial speed dating. So if you're a translator, you can meet with an editor and get advice, so on and so forth. And I think both of us probably had the same reaction of that's going to be a ton of people swarming and asking why we don't publish their books, things like that, right? And the way that it worked was you got 2 pages of the person's they had to sign up and fill out an application form. And then I got assigned 3 people, and I got 2 pages of the project they were working on, and then a brief description and 2 questions that they had, which couldn't be, where can I get this published, or how do I get this published? They had to be something else. So one of mine was this guy that's translating this Russian book that's steeped in the oral tradition, and it's from one of those particular parts of Siberia where people, it's writing wasn't first, it's mostly all oral stuff. And so we were talking about the style of how to make it seem more spoken and less like a written book, where his questions were for these 2 pages. So it was actually really interesting and fun to talk to these people who are engaged on that level, and we're asking as an editor, not as a publisher, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's good that they understood that.
Yeah, and not one of them, even the one kid's I know I can't, I said, oh, have you sent this to anyone? Because I think these people might actually be interested. He's oh, no, I wasn't going to bring that up because I'm not supposed to. Okay, you guys follow rules.
Wow.
But I think that particular thing, there are a lot of people who have participated. I think that'll grow next year and be even more interesting. And it gives, the thing that I want to do too is to give more editors and publishers reasons to be involved. And part of what I'm planning on doing is getting more authors with books out there to the conference, so they can do events in the community and with the conference with their translator at that time, so you can sell books to these people who are into international literature, and also sort of tie it together. So it's not just translators in a void or editors going and being I don't want to deal with translators, but that there's more of an impetus on why you might be able to tie these different parts of the whole community together.
Right.
That's my theory. But yeah, I liked it. I thought it was great. It was the best conference I've been to in a while. And we found a ping pong bar.
Oh, right. You're in Milwaukee, which is a great city. So much, no offense, better than Rochester.
Yeah, well, most everything is. It was cool. It pretty nice. Although we barely ever left the actual hotel. Like everything took place in there, and there was like enough great stuff to like not really have to go anywhere.
So are there plans to sort of expand the involvement, or is it always strictly going to be a translator sort of small publisher sort of world?
Who are you thinking of when you mean expand?
I just mean like, you talk about this like a reviewing translation thing.
Yep.
But maybe it would be good to actually have, instead of just the writers who also write reviews kind of thing, get like, somebody from, I don't know, the Washington Post or New York Times or Chicago, the Tribune to actually talk about this sort of issue in, a straight up newspaper way.
Yep.
What are they looking for? Why do they, review a particular kind of book what do they think of when they do a translation? Is there a different protocol? What happens? That sort of thing. I would love to know. I honestly don't know the answer to these questions, and I would love to know. Or, on the other end, like, we get so many, a lot of like editors like you who are also, the publisher involved, and there's never, it'd be interesting to have like, somebody who designs covers talk about, that sort of process and, what they're trying to evoke and what they found works and why it doesn't and how this fits into a larger picture of, publishing translations. And I'm not saying the publishing side of it needs to be brought to the forefront so much, but, if there is a bigger picture here than just the literary translation, I mean, because the end goal is to obviously translate books that get published.
Yep.
Not just translate in a vacuum. So, and then maybe, I don't know, booksellers from wherever city you're having it in, get them involved. Ask them, how do they talk about translations? Do they mention the translation itself, or are they strictly talking about the literature? And, do they find that they have loyal customers, and are they looking for particular things and projects and that sort of thing? Just sort of, I feel like one thing from my experience at Alta and just with translators in general is they suffer a little bit from like cabin fever just in their lives in general. I mean, these are academic people who spend a lot of time by themselves with books and words, and maybe they don't always get out and understand, the big picture of things. And it might be good to sort of, get everyone thinking a little bit bigger picture, just on a daily basis for what they do,
Yeah, I completely agree with that. We have had, years ago, Steve Wasserman, when he was at the LA Times, came and gave the keynote and talked on a panel about the newspaper aspect of reviewing. So there have been some attempts to do that. The problem has always been that, like, there's no funding, so, like, you have to pay to come to the conference. So for a lot of newspaper people, it's tricky. When we have it in New York in 3 years, it'll be Alta's 40th anniversary, and I think that will be a perfect time to do a lot of that stuff. But I completely agree and want to have more bookseller involvement, more reviewers, more of like that broader picture, and also more like reader-centric stuff.
Right.
Because we have all these people there. And I think that's part of what my thought is, if over the next 2 years in Tucson and San Francisco, if we can create a system by which publishers or reviewers see some value to coming to the conference, and that it's not just a pure expense to talk on a panel for 1 hour, that it might help draw more people in, so that when it gets to New York, it'll be massive. But there's a movement in that way. And like, now that we don't have the problem of restarting every year, where like, in the past, when we did it in Rochester, we could have all those ideas and say, this would be important. And then the next year in Bloomington, Indiana, like whomever took over is just like, well, we're just going to do this whole thing this way. And then at the end, they're like, we really should have more involvement of like reviewers. And then it's like a new person. Like eliminating that so that there's some consistency allows for people like for those ideas to develop, which I think is really positive.
Yes. Well, I'm glad you're in the chair. You're the chair of the board. How many members are on this panel?
I think there's 6. There may be 8. There were 6 people at our meeting, but some of them weren't able to make it. So I think there's actually 8 that are being assigned different kind of aspects to it. Like the people who are in Tucson, it's this guy David and someone else. Their main responsibilities are to like coordinate with the local library and bookstores and things like that to make the local part of it, whereas like myself and via Kushner,
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah, we're doing all the standard programming. So there's always the reviewer one, the editor one, the publisher one, like the few different aspects of that. We're making sure that all those panels exist. And then together, there's a group of us that will go through all the panel proposals and orchestrate them and make them into roundtables or workshops and put together the whole programming of it. And that's a bigger group. But within that, there's these subdivisions of like, you handled this part. Which I think will make a big difference because it was hard putting that together when we did it in Rochester. It was really hard. And now it feels, I didn't want anything to do with them for a long time. And now it seems like it's okay. Like there's support and it's not crazy.
Yeah.
All
right.
I think that's everything. You won our fantasy football league too.
I have not won anything yet. The playoffs.
Well, you won the regular season.
Yeah, that doesn't mean anything.
I might make the playoffs still.
I don't know. I have to look.
There's a lot of people who are 6 and 7.
Yeah, I'm really unhappy that 6 and 7 teams are making the playoffs, but whatever. It's a byproduct of me being so good. It's got to balance out somehow.
I think because you and the other person won a lot of games, there's a lot of us that are 6 and 7, and I think I have the highest point total of the 6 and 7s. Or the second highest. So I think I might make it.
Do you have a rave? You're on rave duty.
Oh, I do. Oh, shoot. So have you listened to the podcast Serial or heard about it?
No, I haven't listened to it yet. I do know about it. I'm waiting for my girlfriend. She's in Miami. We need to listen together. She loves radio. She's not really into TV, I think. Anyway, so I know all about it, and I'm waiting for her so we can listen together.
Okay, so it's fine. I like it. I'm a bit frustrated with it on a few points because it hasn't been advancing much in the past few weeks, and I think they have narrative problems. And it does have that very twee NPR sort of vibe at times. But the thing I want to rave about,
I hate NPR voice more than anything.
Me too. And
I cannot listen to NPR.
So and I'll embed this, but there's a parody of it that people made. That focuses on this one bit about Best Buy, because there's a lot of this crime. For anyone who doesn't know, Serial is going through week by week investigating this crime that took place in 1999, and this guy who's in jail for that crime, for the murder of his girlfriend or ex-girlfriend. But there's a lot of strange things that happen to the case. It's not completely clear if he did it, if he didn't, and whatever. I call her Carol because she sounds like a Carol, but what's her name? Sarah Koenig is the host, and she's like waffles back and forth and asks all these kind of NPR-like questions as she like gets more information. But there's a parody that I found that is so spot on with all of that kind of NPR voice and all that stuff that's what I want to rave about. The series is great. This parody is brilliant. But I'll embed it so that you can listen to it. But it really is like that. They even mock the opening commercial, and then they have the Sarah/Carol saying things like, are we going to find answers today? Probably not. Will anything make sense? That's unlikely. However, we'll go on. And it's like that same exact bit that she does. So it's perfect. So that's my rave.
My rant, and this is, look, there's a lot to rant about in the world. There is. But I'm going to pick on Jonathan Franzen. Because he just sucks. But so what day was this? November 17th, the world was treated to the news that FSG has officially scheduled his new book. And I will get to the title in a moment because it really offends me on many levels. And they interviewed Galassi, and I don't think there's any quote from Franzen because he's not really that. By the way, somebody's writing a biography of him.
What? That's ridiculous.
Philip Weinstein, an English professor at Swarthmore, is writing a biography.
Whatever.
Anyway, so this is Mr. Franzen's fifth novel. By the way, this is the New York Times who reported on this, so they do things like call him Mr. Franzen. So the novel is called Purity.
Yep.
And it is called Purity because and I'm reading from the article, the story centers on a young woman named Purity Tyler, or Pip, who doesn't know who her father is and sets out to uncover his identity. The narrative stretches from contemporary America to South America to East Germany before the collapse of the Berlin Wall, and hinges on the mystery of Pip's family history and her relationship with a charismatic hacker and whistleblower. Now, before I go on, I would just, and I should preface this by saying that I know I'm a man, but I have every right to be offended by this. The fact that he is writing from the viewpoint of a woman and that this woman's name is Purity and that he's calling the book Purity is unbelievably offensive. Like, really, truly offensive. Anyway, I had to get that off my chest. Now, oh my God, I didn't realize this. The Freedom and the Corrections both sold well over 1 million copies. Mm-hmm. And this, again, is, according to the New York Times, this is not a quote from Galassi. It says, his new novel tackles big themes like sexual politics, love, and parenthood. Again, female character named Purity.
Yep.
But the novel also, I'm reading, the novel also marks a stylistic departure for Mr. Franzen. Mr. Galassi said, quote, there's a kind of fabulous quality to it. It's not strict realism. There's a kind of mythic undertone to the story. Then the coup de grace here in the article, the second to last paragraph says, Mr. Franzen, and this is just awful, who has a famously tortured creative temperament.
So good. Such a good line. Famously tortured creative temperament.
Famously tortured creative temperament.
I love that his biography is entitled Jonathan Franzen, the Comedy of Rage.
Comedy of Rage.
What the shit? Oh, Franzen. He's just like the whipping boy in so many ways for like everything that's wrong with like that sort of publishing. He sucks. God, he sucks.
This is what bothers me more than anything about this is that sadly he's what gets held up as our most literary and most interesting writer.
Yep. And all those titles, like Purity is awful and like offensive, like you say, but like before that, Freedom. Like,
oh yeah.
It's like could you maybe tone it down just a bit? Like you're like you're writing this great novel about freedom and what that means in America and with human beings. Like it's just so precious. God, and that book is awful. Like the last 10 pages of Freedom are like the worst 10 pages of any book.
It's really, the thing is, like, a lot of really smart people I know really love his books, and I don't get it.
The N+1 people always really love his books, which I don't understand at all. Because they did like a whole thing for Freedom. Like 4 of them wrote long articles about what they loved about Freedom so much. I really just didn't get that at all either.
I'm really, it's all sort of baffling. There are just so many better writers, you know? So many better.
Yeah.
Dennis Johnson, for example.
Which, I still need that book.
You haven't gotten it yet? It came out.
I know. I did not get it yet. I'm going to check on that.
Which apparently the president is reading.
Oh, really? That's funny. I used that example in my class today of like, if the president's reading a book, like how do you then convert that into sales?
Yeah. Apparently the president is reading Dennis. All I kept seeing on Twitter is President reading Dennis Johnson. I assume it's the new book. I mean, it's about, the fucked up situation on the ground in Africa. That seems like the one to read, not the one about the Vietnam War. Or drug addicts.
Did you like Tree of Smoke?
I love Tree of Smoke.
I thought so.
I really love that book. Yeah. So I also want to give a plug. I'm reading a book right now, and I think you might like it. It's called Bed of Nails, and it is by a French writer, since pretty much all I read is French books these days, named Antonin Varenne, and it was published as Fakirs, Fakirs in French, which is their term for, what has traditionally been the Indian people who, sit on beds of nails and swallow swords and that sort of thing. It's written. The writer is a former philosopher. I mean, he's still a philosopher, but he's a trained philosopher. And the writing, the detective, and then the sort of orbiting characters are all just incredibly smart, and the way he weaves everything together is just brilliant. I mean, it's one of the best. I don't know if I want to say thriller, but it's definitely one of the best sort of crime books I've read in a long time. Like, definitely one of the smartest. It's right up there with like Derek Raymond in terms of like, trying to make sense of humanity's insanity. Published by Mackel House, yet somehow available in the U.S.
Well, they have distribution now because Kirkus got bought.
Right. Okay, so that's what it is. But yes, available in hardcover from Mackel House as of a couple weeks ago. So
that's pretty
very
awesome.
Book.
I've been reading. I started this week, and I didn't want to have to read things that were for work. Like I was too stressed out and whatever. I need to make it through this next trip. So I started reading A Naked Singularity, that Sergio de la Pava book.
Yeah,
you heard of this? It's fucking great. Like it's really great. Yeah, it's strange and great. But yeah, I love the voice in it. It reminds me a lot of William Gaddis, which I think is, if anyone's read William Gaddis and reads that, that's what you will say. But the way that he creates odd voices and that are recognizable is really masterful. And it's so far it's pretty spectacular. But I've only read like 150 of 850 pages, so I do have a 14-hour flight coming up tomorrow though, which I'll probably finish that.
Oh, jeez.
I know. I'm not gonna make it. But yeah, but I just looked, and I'm going to go check out the Dennis Johnson book today too.
All right, you'll read it pretty quickly. It's really an easy read, and it's very propulsive, sort of the storytelling. So you want to know what happens, and it just drags you along happily, I should say. What else? So we just, I think people appreciate when we talk about books, and this is not a new one by any means, but we were texting about Perec.
Oh, yeah.
An attempt at exhausting a place in Paris that I had never read, and just picked it up one day at the bookstore and read it like that night. Man, is that a brilliant book. Perec is a genius, was a genius. I know he's read and people appreciate him. I still feel like more people should read him and appreciate what he did.
I agree. He's amazing. I have the new I Remember in front of me.
I remember, yeah.
Did you read that one as well, or?
No, I haven't read that yet. We seem to sell out as soon as the books come in, so every time I'm looking for a new book, it's never there.
He's fantastic. I want to reread. I reread Life of User's Manual a couple years ago when Scott Esposito was doing like a book club for it or whatever, and I reread it as they were going through it, and that was amazing. To read it now after like years and remember certain parts of it and see how it all fits together so nicely. The one that I really want to reread, that's also been years, is W, or The Memory of Childhood. I remember loving that when I read it back, I guess like a decade ago. But I don't have a copy of that one.
I don't even know that one.
Oh, really? That one's spectacular. It's kind of like it's more about like his family. And the W part ends up being reflected in life, where like that final puzzle piece of the character is shaped like an M, but he has a W, or it's shaped like a W and he has an M. Like it's the opposite of that. So they're sort of related in that sort of Perecian way as well.
Right. Yeah, he was great.
He was. I'm going to pick that up.
So that's it. Everyone should go read some Perec.
Read some Perec, for sure. And everything else. Okay, I'm going to have to go because I have to go get my kids early today. Apparently, They have some issue. God only knows what. And then go do laundry and pack.
All right. Well, it's been a fun podcast. We should do this semi-regularly?
Yeah, there's some guy, I didn't reply to him, but some guys wanted to include us on a list of things of podcasts, but he needed to know our schedule. I was like, oh, I'll write to you sometime. If we do it every other Monday, though, that would still work out pretty well. And we have to do our kind of year-end stuff.
Yeah, I mean, if we can commit, now that I have a regular schedule, if we can commit like every other Monday or Tuesday, I think that's fine.
That's perfect. You're off on Monday and Tuesday?
Yeah, I mean, Tuesday is generally better for me just because it ends up being that way. But
okay. Tuesday is usually better for me because I even when I teach in the spring, I teach at like 10 a.m. or something like that. Or 11, so I'm done in the morning.
All right, that'll work. So yeah, tell him we are now making it officially
every 2 weeks.
Weekly?
Yeah.
Bi-weekly.
Yeah, and we should, for the next one, because it'll be the end of December, or like the 15th, we could talk about some of our favorite books or something. Do a book-centric one.
Book-centric.
Done. Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Good deal. I'll talk to you soon, man.
All right.
Take care.
Later.
Christmas Eve.